Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Okay, hello and welcome. I'm here today with Natacha Lazareff, a sports psychologist, and we're going to chat a little bit about mindset, and who knows where we're going to go in this conversation. There's probably a lot that I want to ask and a lot of information that she's going to be able to share with us to help you to perform better and even just have a better mindset generally in life, because we know that racing can help you to develop that side of yourself. So Natacha, we'll start off with just a little bit of background about you. How did you get into sports psychology? What was it that excited you about that and got you started?
Hi, Celia. Thank you so much for having me on a podcast. It was a bit of a random story as to how I got into sports psychology. As I was telling you before, I was born and brought up in France, and actually psychology is just not so much of a thing there. You can't really take it as a subject at our equivalent of A level, the baccalaureate, and so I just didn't have any exposure to that at all. And I started thinking about it when I watched a TV series. So a bit random, but there was this really powerful woman who was a psychologist in this TV series, and she was really outspoken, very knowledgeable, very strong. And I was like, I'd like to be like that.
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking a little bit more about it and looking into the different types of psychology. And I've got a background in sport. I've always done loads of different sports, love it. And really, there was this moment in university when I was going through some family bereavement. It was a really tough time. And, it was the first time ever that I just didn't have any motivation to get out of bed in the morning. And I'm one of these people who's normally up at the crack of dawn to go and exercise. I'm an early bird. I love it. And it was terrible. But I had just signed up to an Ironman. And so I got to a point where I was like, okay, I really need to actually do some training for this. And that really gave me that routine, that sense of purpose. It just really got me going and helped me, through this time. And of course, once you are swimming, cycling, running, you feel amazing because you get all the endorphins. So it was also great for the mental health side of things. And so that's kind of how I got into sports psychology. I realized it was an actual thing that I could do. And so I then went through all of the qualifications process, which is a long process. And now I've started up my sports psychology consultancy, the Performance Psychologist, and I work with athletes one-on-one to support them in performing better under pressure, really. And then I also do workshops to support teams or groups of athletes around different topics in sports psychology. So that's kind of an overview.
That's your overview. Yeah. What TV program was it? Would we know?
Sex Education.
Oh,
Have you watched Sex Education?
I haven't watched it actually. I know a lot of people that do, but yeah.
So the mother of the main character is actually a sex psychologist,
Okay.
and she is just an absolute powerhouse. And I mean, sex psychology wasn't really my thing, but I made it work for me.
Yeah, and it was like a strong female role model and inspiration to you. That's really cool.
Exactly.
And then, so you were training for Ironman, and that was what. So you were having like a tough time emotionally and mentally, but you kind of found that Ironman was made you get out and made you go and do things that you may not have necessarily wanted to do. And had you looked into the psychology of it before then, or were you just like, I need to get out and train for this bloody Ironman?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. Oh God.
No, it was I had no idea. I mean, I've always done sport, and I always know that sport makes me feel better. So So it was just, and I didn't really have much choice because it's, as we know, it's very expensive to sign up for an Ironman,
Yeah.
and it's quite a daunting prospect once you've done it and you want to do it well.
Yeah.
So but it's really that routine that gives you, it just helps you just do things, well, get things done um, in a way
It provides
that
some structure, doesn't it, to
exactly,
your day when you may be feeling like what's just happened. It's like, having the rug from pulled out from under you, and you're kind of like looking, what can I focus on, where can I have some kind of structure and routine in my life, because everything else has shifted and changed. I guess it's something to like hone in on, and get something that you can
exactly.
control, something that you can put your mind
Yeah,
on as well. It takes a lot of time to train for an Ironman, doesn't it? So you're out there,
absolutely.
and
And it gives you a lot of
I think,
energy as well. I think
yeah,
once you've done the exercise, and then you can then slot in all the rest of the things you need to do in your day around
mm,
that structure. So
yeah, it's like
it's
something to hang everything else off of. Yeah, cool. Which Ironman did you do?
Ironman Austria, actually, which
Okay,
was a fantastic kind of first Ironman because it's a really fast course,
okay.
and it's just perfect condition. I mean, it was perfect conditions when I did it, and I mean, I was brought up in Europe, so I have a bit more tolerance to
For the heat, or
yeah, exactly, but it wasn't even that hot. It was about 21 degrees or 22 degrees, which
mm,
is perfect. I mean, the lake was probably on it was really the there was this big thing about whether we were going to be allowed to use wetsuits or not, and we were just on the
okay,
edge of the cutoff, which was a little bit of a stress because I'm quite a
yeah,
weak swimmer. But yeah, it was beautiful, kind of rolling hills, and a very flat run, so a really good
nice.
beginner triathlon to do.
Yeah. So how did you feel at the end of it? Is it
Uh,
good?
Incredible. It was uh, it was very funny because my supporters couldn't believe, but it was actually so much easier than the training. The
Right? Yeah.
race was it's crazy, isn't it? You go through such a hard time to train,
Mm.
and actually the race, if it goes smoothly, um, is actually pretty easy. So, and it's the first time
I
that
don't
you
know about that, but yeah,
get.
I'll go with it.
But it's the first time that you also, in a long time, that you get to run, cycle, swim on fresh legs, and
Uh,
it's the best feeling, of really being very well. I was very well tapered, or I don't know if that's a thing, but very
yeah.
well rested, and it just felt incredible.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and there's a lot of support as well, isn't there, when you're out on the course? It's that sort of atmosphere that gets you
Yeah,
round. Whereas when you're slogging out in the rain on your own on a
I
bike,
know.
it's not quite the same, is it? So it's worth it for that feeling at
No,
the end.
absolutely.
Oh, it's amazing. So, I mean, you trained for that long distance event when you were going through some tough times. Are there any other kind of common mental challenges that you find people face, or that you faced as well when you were doing that?
Well, I think you mentioned it yourself. When like keep maintaining that motivation through a really long training block, especially as most of the racing season will be in summer. So actually, you've got to
Mm,
do quite a lot in winter. And frankly, the winter conditions in the UK, mainly for cycling, are just can be very difficult,
yeah,
and so it can be really difficult to maintain that commitment. It takes a lot of sacrifice because you can't always go and do all the things, all the socializing, for example, that you might want to do because your weekends have to be in a certain way, a little bit designed around
yeah,
your training, and I think what can really help is to know your why and
mm,
and really understand what is driving you. And I find actually a lot of athletes don't really know their why. They will
mm,
often answer that question with their goals. So for example, oh, I'm doing this because I want to complete an Ironman. And then you ask, well, why do you want to complete an Ironman? And then, so somebody might then say, well, okay, I want to challenge myself. But then there are so many easier
There's
ways
lots
to
of
challenge
ways.
yourself. Let's be honest, But why do you want to challenge yourself in this way? And so by asking that question, why, a couple of times, you might then get like an answer. For example, like, I want to challenge myself physically so that I can really test my limits, to inspire other women to do the same. So that was kind of my why, and actually that's much more powerful than I just want to complete an Ironman.
Yeah, or get a medal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's even worse because it's outcome. Yeah, it's outcome orientated, and so I think really having that clear why can really help you when you're struggling with motivation in your training, but even in the race, and can really be hugely motivating.
Yeah, I like that. Your why sounds very similar to mine, because I remember watching Iron Man and it came through the town, and I was, like, wow, the atmosphere is amazing. It's like, just, I've never seen anything like this before. It's so cool. And I could imagine these people have put so much of their energy. You can tell they put so much energy into preparing for this one day, and what they'd been through. Probably I could sort of see it and imagine it in my head. And this one woman stopped at a feed station that I was hanging around on, and she said to the guy, oh, can you just put this there? And she asked for some help from this guy, and I was like, wow, she must have been through a lot to do that. That's amazing. And then that was she inspired me to do it, plus the whole atmosphere of the day. And when I went round the course, that was what I was thinking to myself. These girls, there was like kind of younger girls, teenage girls with their families cheering. I was like, every time I went past one, I was like, I'm hopefully inspiring you to see that women can do like really hard, amazing things. And it is, like you say, it's a powerful thing to be able to think in your head, and to get you through the training, and also get you around the course when it's feeling tough as well. It's like, I'm being a beacon of inspiration or something along those lines to people. And yeah, it's a great why. But you're right, there are a lot of people that don't know their why. They're not sure exactly why they're doing. They've got a vague idea, and it's usually surface level, isn't it? Like that, it's like, I want to do an Ironman because I've seen someone else do it, or whatever. But you can't. But there's usually something underneath that they're not quite tapped into, and if you can unlock that, it's going to make a huge difference. Okay, so how about, have you noticed any differences, or kind of being aware of any differences between the challenges that you think women and men face when they're preparing for events, or even just like competing in events as well?
Well, I think women can set really high standards for themselves, and I didn't say that men don't do that, but women have sometimes a tendency of, the combination of really high standards and then not feeling like they are ever good enough and ever able to achieve these standards. And with triathlon, I think it's a sport that naturally attracts these high achievers already, because I mean, one sport is not enough. Let's do three.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of women who probably score quite highly on the perfectionism scale, and I think there's sometimes this myth that perfectionism is a good thing to have in sport, but it's actually not conducive to high performance. It leads to putting a lot of pressure on yourself, so a lot of anxiety, and it can also really affect your enjoyment of the sport on the long run. So, I really, I'd recommend, if an athlete is frequently having those thoughts that they are not good enough, to really sit down and have an honest written reflection, if possible, because I think
Yeah.
Writing things down is always really good for clarity, and to go over their journey and really focus on their progress rather than this idea of a goal, or trying to reach this elusive notion of perfection that will just never be achieved. And so really trying to focus more on that progress, and that journey, and also rethinking the way that we look at goals. And we kind of approached it a little bit, this idea, if you have a goal that's very very outcome orientated, like,
Mm.
I want to medal at this race, or I want to run a sub 3 hour marathon, or something
Mm.
like that. It's very restrictive, because there's a whole lot of things you will not be able to control during that
Yeah.
race, and so it it can be well, just a bit disheartening sometimes.
Mm.
And it can be better to have goals that are more process orientated, such as, I want to finish my marathon strong.
Yeah.
And if you're focusing more on how you want to achieve things rather than the actual results, it takes off a lot of the pressure,
Yeah.
and also can just be much more satisfying, and still be really good for performance. You don't
Yeah.
have to choose one or the other. I don't know, how do you do any goal setting with your clients?
Yeah. I mean, we do, and it varies. It's almost like you have to change depending on where that person is and what situation they're in, um, and how much we know about them as an athlete as well. So it can be quite tricky to do. And I always say it's probably better for them to, because they're going to know what they can do on race day. It's probably better for them. I can give them a kind of an idea. If we're looking at times and things like that, it's very, very difficult to predict. I know I did it with Ironman when I was training for
Mhm.
Ironman. I wanted to do a certain time. I kind of knew what I was capable of. So I gave myself a bandwidth, and something that I'd seen was giving yourself like different goals. So you've got like a bronze goal, a silver goal, and then a gold goal. So you don't go away thinking, oh, I didn't do any of those things. Um, so yeah, and even if you have a mechanical on the bike or something, you could still perform well on the run, or there's
Mhm.
that way of looking at it. There's so many things you can do, aren't there, with goal setting. And I did hear something about that, kind of having a secret goal as well. You kind of say, oh, I only want to finish, I'm not bothered. People will say that, won't they? But actually in their head they're like, I want to go sub whatever, and they won't vocalize it because they're a bit scared maybe of it. But then obviously when they don't achieve that, they're disappointed and upset because they were like, but I wanted to do that in the back of the. They didn't tell you
Yeah.
about it. They're still like, and everyone's like, well, you completed it. What are you upset about? Because I didn't do that, but you didn't say you were going to do that, wanted to do that. So it's important to know like those goals and kind of weed out, isn't it? Like, okay, what is it that you really want, and is that really realistic or achievable, and
Mhm.
can we change it or adapt it or have some options open for you. I guess that's how I approach things generally with goal setting.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of doing things. And actually, I like the secret goal is an interesting one, because perhaps, I guess, the gold level goal that you are talking about, that would probably be a secret goal for me. But it's
Right.
something that I will only, or just something that I wouldn't tell other people about. But then I would not really focus on it till, like,
Yes.
I'm probably halfway through the run on an Ironman or something like that, or at the start
Mm.
of a run at an Ironman, and I all of a sudden know that there's a lot more that I can control,
Yeah.
and then I
You're
can start
there as
looking at.
well.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
can start, and also I'm just not one of these people who's like obsessed with pacing, and so I won't look at my watch. I'll
Right.
do a lot by, when I'm racing, I do a lot by just perception of how I feel,
Yeah.
and then it's only towards the end that I might start looking at my watch and thinking, actually, this is what's achievable for me, and if I start if I've got a bit of energy in the tank, I can start pushing.
Yeah.
And so that's how I take the pressure off myself, and I know it works for me, but I know
Yeah.
that also it's different for other people, because lots of people love the idea of being quite measured and
Mm.
really going, following a specific pace and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more like that. I like to sort of have a lot more control over what's happening, which isn't all, if something goes wrong, that's what I learned, I suppose, through doing that was if something goes wrong, like I had a bad swim at the first Ironman, it kind of threw me off then for the rest of the day. I was okay, but in the back of my head, I was giving myself a hard time about this swim.
Mhm.
And the thing was, everybody had an awful swim that time because it was such bad conditions. So you've got to remember that as well. It's like it's not just you always having, that, but you tend to sort of focus in on yourself then and think, oh, I didn't do it so well, but it's not
I,
necessarily the case.
this is a big thing, actually. It's I think we have to be a bit careful with the word mindfulness, because people just, you know they
Mm,
they picture kind of meditation, sitting cross-legged, and it can
yeah,
have a bit of a bad connotation, but it's so important to work on. And mindfulness is just being mindful of your thoughts, and being aware of the thoughts that are coming in, and trying to refocus yourself into the present moment,
yeah,
and not be looking back onto the past, as you say, like a past mistake or something that didn't go well, because there's genuinely nothing you can do about that. And
yeah.
all it does is it distracts you. It's a massive
Mm,
distraction from what's happening in the moment, and it's taking you away from your current performance. And so it's really important to try and anchor yourself into the present. And well, in sports psychology, we often use cue words to do this. So if
yeah,
you notice that your mind is going off, either in the past or in the future, because you can start
yeah.
getting a bit overexcited and saying, oh my god, like
I'm
I'm
gonna
actually going to
win.
fill it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it can be a bit like, it can be a bit too early to start
Yeah.
thinking that way, and also really put you off your race. So yeah, we would often use a cue word, based on, often it can be often just like a technical thing, but anything that will bring you back into the present. So perhaps if you're running, it could be something about your pedal stroke, and it could just be or power or something like that,
Yeah.
that will bring you back into the present, and make you focus on something that is really going to help your performance in the now,
Mm,
and take you away from those wandering thoughts that can be very distracting.
yeah, I love that. Can you sing Let It Go? Let it go, let it go.
Oh no.
Would that work?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Anything that works for you. The
I
most
do that
important.
quite often,
Yeah.
just with general day-to-day stuff. We have, like, if something happened, we're like, and then one of myself or my husband will start singing that, and it
I
sort of
love
brings
that.
a bit of humour. Like, okay, just it's fine, just let it go, it's fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's this funny one.
I This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I know we both do climbing, and
Yeah.
in climbing, singing is a great coping mechanism, and because
Okay.
especially for sometimes for fear, because
Yeah.
it really helps you it lightens the atmosphere. It gets you
Mm.
thinking about something else, and it can be a really good. It's quite a well-known coping mechanism. So
Oh, that's good.
um, it's
Yeah, no, I've used it in triathlon as well. I have sung. I'm sure I've told this story before, but there was a time trial I did, and it was pouring with rain. It was just horrendous, and I was like on my TT bars singing Chesney Hawkes' "I Am the One and Only." It was
I
just
love that.
awful, and it was just the worst song that I don't know why that popped into my head. I was really getting into it. I did kind of like just because it can be grim. It's like, oh my god, what am I doing out here? And I was like, come on, you can do this.
And I think
So
that's just it's a bit of a distraction technique as well,
yeah,
from and it's to take your attention away from negative things, right, and lighten
yeah,
the mood, because sometimes we can be, well, we have a negativity bias. Have you heard of this?
yes, yeah,
So it's much easier for us to pay attention to all of the negative things that are happening in our life. And it used to
Mm,
be a survival trait because,
yeah.
we'd want to identify threats so as to protect ourselves. But in our very modern, comfortable lives, it really hinders us in a lot of the things we do.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're aware that that happens, and it happens to everyone as well, because I sometimes used to think, oh, it's just me that is like that, but it's everyone. Just
Absolutely.
think, oh, I can change it as well. You can change it because you can notice it. And that's the words that it, you sort of reminded me of some words that I quite often get people to think of that, like think of some words that you can use, in the swim, and they might write it in their race plan or on the bike, like
Hmm.
calm, relaxed in the swim when people get
Hmm.
stressed and are anxious. And you can write things on your bike as well to just remind you to tune into that when you go in. So I think that's a really good tip for people as well. And I think I did
Yeah.
some like before the event, like when I was there was a lot riding on my doing well in this event. I did some hypnotherapy stuff like
Hmm.
before I went to bed. And you know how they do that deeper, go deeper now, deeper now, deeper now.
Hmm.
And it came like in the middle of the run when I was feeling awful, all of a sudden this word pops. It was like dig deeper, like this, and it came
Yeah.
it came into my head, and it really helped me just get through a bad patch on the marathon. And it was sort of linked me into that state of being slightly hypnotized, I think,
Yeah.
and I just got into a rhythm, and it worked really well. So
Yeah.
words are very powerful, and the language that we use can have a massive
Absolutely.
impact on us. We need to choose the right, or yeah, the more positive words that we can. Or I don't like to use right and wrong either.
Yeah.
I get myself in a
Helpful.
mess sometimes because I'm like, I don't want to use that word. I don't want.
I
Is
think
it?
helpful and unhelpful are good words. So instead of positive and negative,
Yeah.
it's like thoughts because it's not necessarily negative thoughts because negative
Mm.
thoughts could sometimes be helpful. They could often, they might
Might be
save your life.
realistic.
Or, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I think helpful or unhelpful is a good way of describing
Yeah.
um, things.
Yeah. Definitely. Super important. Awesome. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was like we talked about women having these high standards for themselves, and having a bit of a perfectionist mentality. How about like entering races and things like that? Because I know you did Keltman, and you were talking about the low entry rates of women. Do you think there's a reason that that happens, and is there anything we can do about it? Or
Um, so I think there's the problem is that competition can be very daunting to women, and actually there's a bit of a myth that women are less competitive than men, and research has shown that that's not actually true, but they
okay.
are competitive in a different way. And unfortunately a lot of these races are set up with this kind of win at all cost attitude, and can feel, they can lead to quite a bad atmosphere,
Mm,
or once again an atmosphere that women don't appreciate as much as men perhaps. And I think this is especially visible in big races like Ironman, because people have invested a lot of money to be there.
mm,
They have put so much time into their training, and like, to be honest, quite a lot of people are there for the bragging rights. If you're looking at
mm,
a certain, at the amateur level, so they're not really out there to support other competitors or to be friendly or helpful. They they're there to have their own performance, and
mm,
I think that can lead to a not very friendly atmosphere. And then on the other side of we have events like parkrun,
mm.
which is a great example where we have loads of women. I think parkrun is practically, you practically get half half,
Wow.
um, uh, and it's because it's more geared around beating your own previous time
Yeah.
than it is about beating other participants.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think a lot of women appreciate more. And what's interesting is actually the research is showing that having this mentality of competing against yourself rather than competing against others can be really conducive not only to performance but also to just long-term enjoyment and thriving in your sport. So
Mm.
we I think we have to reframe a little bit this idea of competition and try first of all to design some events. And I actually haven't done the outlaw triathlons, but I've heard a lot
Okay.
about them, and apparently they are quite friendly
Yeah.
as well. So I think we need to try and also potentially have some events that are a bit friendlier.
Branding maybe is not quite right for, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because it doesn't even need to be like a level. It's not necessarily linked to the level. So
Mm.
of racing. So at the last Ironman, actually, it was probably 2 years ago now. The last Ironman championships in Kona,
Mm.
some women age groupers started a campaign. I don't know if you heard about it, and it was
Okay.
called "With Superior to Against." And they were really
Right. Yeah.
trying to encourage the female, at least the women age groupers to have that supportive attitude of
Mm.
you're actually using other competitors to spur yourself on, but
Yeah.
ultimately you're racing against yourself, you're racing your race, and it shouldn't, it
Shouldn't be
shouldn't
about beating people
exactly.
and being coming out on top. Yeah. I was talking to I think it was Heather. I can't remember now, or it could have been. I think in a recent podcast that I talked to someone, and they were saying the same thing about that. Us collaborating together rather
Exactly.
than being like, I've got to beat all these people and win this race, or that sort of mentality. And to be honest, I think that's how we should be moving towards as a society, really.
Yeah,
Like, everybody should be moving towards, we need to work together, rather than that kind of um it's Darwinian
yeah,
kind of survival of the fittest idea, because that's not how humans really are. Like, genuinely, most people actually want to help each other and get on really well. So
exactly.
I think if we can bring that into sport, where you are in that supposedly competitive environment, then it can spill out into other areas as well. And I remember hearing that a long time ago, actually, about using, there was some pros talking about how they're not, you sort of think, oh, there's this rivalry between these people because they're at the top. And it's like, no, they're not like that at all. They're using each other's performance to inspire each other and push each other on, and be the best that they can be in that moment. And that's a really kind of, I don't know, it just makes you feel good, rather than
Yeah.
like, it makes you feel good about being competitive, because it's like, well, I'm helping other people. Because competitive has a bad word, associate
Yeah,
in your head, this power of language again. You hear that word, sometimes it can turn people off. um
absolutely.
I didn't think I had a problem with it, but then I was like, oh, I don't want to, you know I'm, I'm a bit, or you say, oh, I'm a bit competitive, and it's almost like apologetic, and
Mhm.
it's like, well, what's wrong with that? It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah,
Competition should
absolutely.
be fun. Competing should be
Yeah.
fun.
But it's also interesting. So I think Federer said that he was very grateful that Nadal came onto the scene because he wouldn't be half the player he is today without
Mhm.
Nadal because we want strong competitors. If we are seeing it as a collaboration, it means that
Mm.
we encourage strong competition because that means that we will have more to work towards. We'll have a higher quality of competition, and then we will be pushing harder. But if you're all just set about winning, then
Mm.
you want weaker competition just
Yeah.
so you can win. But ultimately you're not performing at at your at the ultimate level or pushing your limits in the
Mm.
same way as if you had stronger competition.
Yeah, and you're not getting as much from it because you don't then start looking at, okay, where can I improve? You just don't have to, because it's like, oh, it's going to be easy for me. I don't really have to think about it. Whereas if you have that competition and that those people around you that may be doing things in a different way, or they have different strengths and weaknesses. Again, it's language again. I don't like to use that word, but I'm going to use it for ease. Um, then you start looking at, okay, well, where can I improve in that area or that area, and you become more like holistic and think about a lot of other things that you might not have actually bothered to. So it kind of makes you lazy, doesn't it? That kind of like, oh, no, there's no competition. I don't need to try.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
for sure. But actually, coming back to, I feel as I didn't completely answer your question.
yeah, we got
If
off.
we are, if we're talking about Countman as a race specifically,
Yes.
um, I think the reason there are probably less women is that it has a bit of a reputation as a really hard race. So for people who don't
Mm,
know, Countman is part of the X Tri series. So it's the same series that does Norseman as well in Norway. And so the concept is that they are extreme long distance triathlons
yeah.
in harsh environments. And so I think because it has that reputation, it it probably, because of the kind of we haven't really spoken about it, but I also think that female athletes sometimes lack a bit more self-confidence
Mm,
than male athletes. And so I think coupled with that, they may just think it sounds a bit daunting.
yeah.
But what's interesting is that actually, because it's a much less straightforward race than Ironman, and what I mean by that is that with Ironman, there's only so much that it's more controllable, I would say, because the conditions um, in Ironman are a bit more controllable. You're racing on roads most of the time, and whereas Countman has a trail marathon in it. It has a very windy, or it's got a bike course that is notorious for terrible headwinds and is
Mm.
very windy, and often the weather, because it's the northwest coast of Scotland, the weather is often just horrible.
Yeah.
So so it makes it much
Character
more
forming.
exactly. So it's actually, people are much less uh, focused on results for Countman.
Yeah.
Very few people go into Countman thinking, I want to do a sub 14 race. And once again, they might have an idea of what they'd like to achieve, but
Mm,
it's much more about the experience. And so I think actually I would really encourage women to sign up for this race, because it's such a great atmosphere and people are supportive, and it does attract people who are a bit nuts. So it
yeah.
feels like there's a bit of a clan,
Yeah.
and then there's a fantastic Kaylee to celebrate the next day, which is really fun. So
Nice.
it I think it's a bit like the difference between sometimes trail races and road races.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially these long distance, maybe the ultras, there's more of an emphasis on experience rather
Mm,
than maybe completion, rather than a specific time, because
yeah.
probably there's so much less that you can control.
Yeah.
So it's an achievement just to get to
Just
the
to
end of it.
finish that
Yeah,
event. Yeah,
exactly.
definitely. Yeah. I think I had a guy that did Norseman. You get like a different coloured T-shirt or something, don't you, in
Yes.
Norseman, if you get
Yeah.
to the top in time? So there's a
Yeah.
little bit of an incentive, isn't there, for people? I can't
Yeah.
remember what it was now. He managed to get it just. It was like I was watching the track and going, "Oh, come on!" But
um,
that's your sort of, I guess, can be a motivation for people
yeah.
who are focused on a time or some kind of recognized achievement. But like you say, for those events, just turning up and completing them. And I have heard a lot of people say that about these smaller events that are a bit out there. They can be
Hmm.
much more friendly because people are just doing them for the experience of the race rather than, oh, I want to do an Ironman because it's an Ironman branded event and everybody else has done
Exactly.
it, and so I need to tick that box or whatever. So yeah, there's a bit more to it than that.
Yeah.
I
And
did an event like that. I think there was about 20 of us did it, and it was really nice. We started, it was very, very low key. And you cycled from the top of Wales, like North Wales, down to the south, and then you ran up um, Snowdon, Cadridress, and Penfan on the way, and you had to have like a car. You had to have someone that supported you on picked up your
yeah.
bikes when you were running, drove it to the bottom of the mountain, the next bit, so that you could cycle the next bit. And I remember turning up at the start of this race, and it was like there's all these people, it was horrendous weather.
Of course.
And we're stood there in our kind of like, what are we doing? Sort of 5 o'clock in the morning, pouring with rain, just miserable. And it was June as well. It was like just awful. I didn't have enough clothing, and it was like, but I felt like, yeah, I'm part of this tribe. It just felt good, even though there was about 3 women doing it or something.
Mhm.
It still felt like a nice atmosphere, and yeah, people weren't. They were more relaxed and sort of,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a good vibe. So yeah, people remember that, then it might encourage them to go and do it. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes the photos you see, like for Norseman, they always, whenever I think of it, I imagine that photo. They've got that photo, and there are people standing before the swim on the edge of the ferry, going, looking really worried. I don't know if I want to do that because it looks really nerve wracking. But I've heard it's not as bad. They'll make it
But
better.
everyone's also worried at the start of any start
Yeah,
line. It's always too early in the morning. It's
yeah,
always cold. It's often dark, and you're just like, "What am I doing here?" And it's I think it's contagious as well.
yeah,
Everybody feels like that, and as soon as you're out there and doing it, it's absolutely fine, and it gets
yeah.
a lot better.
Yeah, it's true. It's that kind of like when you're waiting for something to happen, and you just want to get in there and get on with it, don't you? And as you
Exactly.
say, as soon as you start swimming, it just it's all gone, and you just happy to be in there
Yeah.
doing that event. Awesome. So, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit with, but I just wanted to talk about cultivating a positive mindset, and you building that resilience in sport. We touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but is there anything else that you wanted to say about having that positive mindset and what we can do to help
So
us?
I think first of all we have to. Resilience is really our ability to recover quickly from setbacks,
Yes.
and I think this the best way to do that is to, and as you say, we've spoken about it, but it is to embrace a growth mindset. I don't know. Have you ever heard of a growth mindset?
Yes.
It's pretty self-explanatory, and it's
Yeah. Explain. Just because I know doesn't mean.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's about it's about this idea that our abilities are not set, and
Mm,
that we will they grow through hard work, and every challenge and every difficult situation that we overcome is helping us to build our skills and our abilities. And so if you embrace this growth mindset, you will actually actively seek out difficult situations, to help you grow and learn more.
mm,
Um, and and so in that way you can see setbacks as opportunities to learn something, rather
yeah.
than this negative thing that holds you back. And I think a really good example is how you approach injuries, and
Mm,
this is very I think very relevant to triathlon. But obviously it's devastating to get an injury, and I think you do have to let yourself grieve a little bit, maybe let out those emotions, have a bit, feel a bit sorry for yourself for a bit, but then you've got to approach it in a proactive way and think of, actually, when else do I have all of this spare time? Normally training takes up so much time. What can I do to to use this time in a constructive way? And you can go to the gym and do all of those strengthening exercises that you never have time to do, work on your glutes and your ankles and all the imbalances, your mobility that you've been told by your physio to do hundreds of times, so that you can come out stronger. You can work on your mental game. So for example, there are things like mindfulness and visualization they're really skills that you need to practice and over and over again. And once again, it can be quite difficult to find time to do that when you're training, but it's a great opportunity when you have that extra time. You can also work on your tactics and your strategy. You can also take a bit of time off and socialize and see those friends that you've been meaning to see for the last forever. And so if you approach injury from the kind of proactive way of, I'm going to get the most out of this possible, then you can actually come back from injury stronger, wiser, more mentally relaxed, in a much better position than when you left. And then you just build up that physical fitness, which will often come quite quickly, if because of muscle memory and things like that. And you can actually be in a much better position. And that's an example of growth mindset, rather than a fixed mindset, which is this idea like, well, either you have it or you don't. And it's a bit the whole nature versus nurture debate in talent acquisition. And okay, some people may be born more talented and maybe may have more skills in some parts, but it's pretty well established that whatever happens, you need to put in a lot of work and put in a lot of deliberate practice in order to hone your skills. So embracing that growth mindset is really appreciating that any setback is an opportunity to learn and to get better at what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I think that kind of thing has helped me in the past. It's easy for people to get frustrated and look at everything that they've lost or everything that they can't do, and I can't do this and I can't, and you go on that sort of, we were talking earlier about how we're programmed to look at the negative and have that negative bias, and that's what can happen when you get an injury. But you can turn it around and say, okay, what can I do? What is within my control? How can I make this into a better learning opportunity, as something that I can build on and improve? And maybe notice, I found from getting injured, I notice it sooner now as well. It's like, okay, Absolutely. How can I recognize this quicker next time? Because otherwise the same thing keeps happening to you. It's like the universe is trying to tell you something here. Learn this lesson. You didn't get it this time, you're going to have to do it again. So yeah, every time you have those setbacks, it is you're being sent a lesson, really, aren't you? Like, how can I learn this lesson and move
exactly.
on and grow?
And the fantastic thing about being an athlete is that with experience, you get to know your body really well. And I think that's a fantastic gift in a way. And as you say, you can really learn from these injuries and learn to listen to your body and to understand the subtleties between, is that a twinge? Is that just a bit of muscle soreness? Or am I just a bit tired? Or is that, an injury that's about to happen? Yeah. And so I think that really comes with experience and is a nice feeling.
Yeah, it is, because it means you've got control over that, or you feel more in touch with your body. You've got that kind of knowledge, and it gives you that feeling of, yeah, I'm in charge of this. It's not just something that's kind of happening to you. You're actually proactively taking charge of it and doing something and doing what you need to do to keep yourself healthy and and fit and able to compete and perform well. Amazing. Okay, so have you got, and like, is there, what do you think the most important thing for people to sort of take away from today's chat is? That's a really hard question. What's the most important? There's so many things.
Well, actually, it's something that we only mentioned in passing, but I think is
Right.
really important for endurance, triathlon, endurance, any kind of endurance event, and it's the way we talk to ourselves. And you mentioned
Mm,
it with that, when you were kind of overly focusing on the past, we all have an inner voice in our heads, and in during a triathlon we have so much time on our own, and so it's
mm,
really important that a we are conscious of how we speak to ourselves, and b that we have strategies to 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 speak to ourselves in a more in a better or more helpful way. So I would recommend. I think a lot of people are not even that aware sometimes of what they say to themselves. So I'd first of all recommend that over several training sessions, over several competitions, to really just listen to that voice. Is it overly critical? Is it
mm,
encouraging? Is does that depend on how your performance is going? Um, do you have these kind of scripts that come back over and over again? Do you say the same things to yourselves? So first of all, notice them, and then well, a couple of tips. First of all, if you are speaking to yourself, often we speak to ourselves in the first person, but a great tip is to speak to ourselves in the second person. Have you ever done this before?
yeah, I've heard this. Yeah. So you, yeah, go on.
So yeah. So instead of saying, "I know I can do this," I would say, "You can do this, Natasha,"
Mm,
and it sounds like somebody else is saying it to you, and so it's much more powerful because we tend to believe other people over ourselves. So that's a really easy one. And then I think when you're having unhelpful thoughts, there's a really great way of distancing yourself away from those thoughts, and that comes back to the mindfulness that we are talking about.
mm,
And so if you, instead of something like, if it's, "Oh, I'm so slow, I'll never make it,"
yeah.
you could say, "I'm having the thought that I'm so slow and I'll never make it." So if you
Okay.
just add "I'm having the thought that" in front of any thought, it takes you away from that thought,
Yeah.
and it kind of makes you realize that it's just a passing thought, not a truthful description of who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier to, yeah, to not believe it, because if not, we can start believing these random thoughts that come in and out of our minds, and it can have a really bad effect on our
Yeah.
emotions. um so that's
Yeah.
another.
Those, yeah, that's great. And I remember doing, when I first started training for an Ironman, I was like, right, I need to kind of work on my mindset because I knew that I could get in sort of negative spirals with things. And I would, there was an exercise in one of the books I have where you go and you write it all down. So you said,
Mhm.
talked about writing earlier and how powerful it is. So anytime I would have a thought when I came back from my training session, I'd write it down. Or I just even sat there like without training sometimes and wrote it down, and then went through and go, okay, is it true? What's a different belief? That's
Yeah.
another technique, isn't it? So you say, if it's true, then how can I frame it in a different
Yeah.
way? And if it isn't true, then what can I say instead of that, that's not, that's going to be more helpful to me and
Mhm.
when I'm actually thinking that thought. And then you can change, because you know that thought's going to come up because it might be a repeating pattern.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes up, you replace it for the other thing that you wrote down, and that can also help. I found that helps me quite a bit. And then I wrote things all over the place. I had like it's a paper with things written on. I had little cards and stuff like that. I mean, you can go to town on that kind of stuff, can't you? It's
Yeah,
it's pretty cool, some of the things you can do to
absolutely.
help your brain.
I think reframing, as you were saying, is another technique that's often used, and it kind of depends because I think some unhelpful thoughts can be very difficult to break out
Yes.
of, and so that's when the just distancing yourself from it can be quite a
Yeah.
good technique.
Because they've
But
taken years to build up, haven't they? You're not going to just
yeah,
suddenly go, oh, yeah, I don't feel like that anymore. You've got to
yeah.
have, yeah, you need work to do
So it
that.
depends. It really depends on the situation. So reframing, as you were saying, you could have this, I'll never make it. This is too hard. And then say instead, I'm doing my best,
Mm.
and whatever happens, I'm learning from this experience. Once again, it goes back to that growth mindset, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes it might be a bit difficult to believe yourself. But it's about testing out these different techniques and seeing what works for
Yeah.
you specifically.
I think that believability is really important because it is, you can, your brain knows when you're lying to yourself or when you're sort
Yeah.
of like bending the truth a bit, and it can be, and then it'll start arguing with it. Like, no, I don't want that going on to you. It's like,
Yeah.
so
Well, a good way of, I think, of countering that is also uh, being clear on your values. And so if you were, you know, once again, a lot of people don't really know what their values are, or
mm,
haven't sat down and really thought of 4 or 5 values that are really important to them.
yeah.
And so if you can then link up, and for example, if your one of your values is challenge, or then reframing it to, I know this is difficult, but I'm doing my best and I'm learning from this,
Mm,
would actually be quite compatible with your
yeah.
values, and would then potentially be more convincing
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point about values and writing those down as well. I think, it is worth, people don't take the time to think and write and, go into that stuff, but it's so powerful when you do. It makes a
Yeah,
huge difference to anything really that you're going through, because when you're aware of something, you can do something about it.
exactly.
If you're not aware, then you can't change, you can't grow, you're just sort of stuck because you're not even aware that you're sabotaging yourself sometimes, isn't it? It can be just like
Yeah.
self sabotage with certain ways of thinking.
And I mean, I understand, training for triathlon takes up an enormous amount of time. So,
Mm,
but it is a shame to arrive to a race that you've been training for 6 months plus, and your physical training is there, and
mm,
then you're let down by either. I mean, I'm so surprised when people don't have a proper nutrition plan for an Ironman, for
mm.
example. I mean, it feels like, what are you doing? It's such a basic thing, and it's such a shame. You've spent
Yeah,
so long and so much like hard work on the physical side, and that might all be completely negated by just the nutrition. And it's the same for the mental side. It could just be, if something crops up that you haven't prepared for,
yeah,
it could really, make or break your race.
yeah. And it's gonna, in an Ironman, you're gonna have
Yeah,
something. You can't avoid coming
yeah,
to terms with something along the way. So it's better to prepare for that before the event than end up in a state. And you can practice that in shorter races as well. But
yeah,
I think the longer distance and the more challenging an event, the more you're gonna face some truths about yourself and some things that you can learn from. So it's amazing. I think it's great that we're able to do that. Really, how
it is.
what a cool way to explore ourselves and learn about ourselves. Amazing. Okay, so I know that you're running some workshops for triathletes who want to work on their mindset and prepare for races. So if you want to just have a quick introduce about that. I don't know. How long have you got? You all right for
No,
time?
yeah,
Yeah, you're
absolutely.
okay. That's fine then. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yes, so I'm doing a couple of workshops based mostly on triathletes, but also runners or cyclists or people of the different sports.
Okay.
And one of them, we did speak about perfectionism and how this is something that specifically can often really hold people back. So I'm doing a workshop on perfectionism on Monday, the 22nd of April.
Okay.
We can put all the links. I can send you all the
Yeah.
information. And it's really going to be about, first of all, identifying where we stand on the perfectionist scale, because
Okay.
it is actually a range. You're not either a perfectionist or not. We
Yeah.
all have different traits. So it's about being, first of all, that awareness of what tendencies we have,
Mm.
and then trying to make a bit more of an action plan around, really a reality check about actually how we're doing towards our goals, rather than setting ourselves up for failure with expectations that are way too high.
Mm.
So yeah, if you want more information about that, you
Yeah,
can
all
always
the
contact me.
info will be in the show notes. I'll put links to your Instagram and your
Hmm.
website, and then the workshop as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
you'll know where to find Natasha, and it's been really good talking to you. What's on the horizon for you, racing wise? Have you got any events planned?
To be honest, I have just got a gravel bike, and
Okay.
so it's not like I have enough
Yeah,
bikes.
there's nice bikes behind you. They
Yeah,
must be clean if they're hanging on the wall.
that is a good point. I don't actually live in Wales, so
Okay.
there's a lot less mud here.
Yeah.
But yes, so I'd like to get into some long. There's this. Have you heard of the Frontier 300?
No.
Um, it's a ride race, basically along the Scottish borders, from
Okay.
from one coast to the next. So I'd quite like
Nice.
to do that. It's in June, so I'd better get going and start
Yeah.
training. But it's a nice, it's a gravel biking race, and they were
Okay.
saying that precisely they don't have enough women who want to sign up for it. It's 300 kilometers, which is probably the longest I'll ever have done on a bike in one go.
Mm.
So it will be a challenge, but I think it should be beautiful, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Which way do you go, from east to west or west to east?
Let me think. I think it's from west to east, but I'm
So
not
you
100%
hopefully
sure.
get the wind behind you.
Hopefully. It's a long way to get a headwind.
I know.
And there probably will be loads of wind because it's, Scotland. So
Yeah, yeah. I know. Oh, that sounds cool. Well, if any people are listening to this and think, yeah, I want to enter it, then there's some
yeah.
inspiration for you. Sounds really good. Well, thank you very much for talking with me, Natasha. It's been great to have you on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Thank
Celia. It was
you.
fantastic speaking to you too. Have a
Cheers.
great day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.